All right. So we got everyone in here and we can get started. So yeah, thanks everyone. Really excited and just kind of giving the intro for this, especially as we record it and we'll share it out with others afterwards. But really, this is our inaugural Fireside chat. And Amy, super excited to have you be the first one. Just to give
Thank
a
you.
little context, I suppose, it's while we've been working on Kumo and really building out this business over the last couple of years, I think one of the most fundamental pieces has been the conversations and really these partnerships we've had just talking with colleagues, mentors like you, and just all sorts of how do we continue to have these conversations to help grow, help evolve, help change.
Hmm.
And I think that's been why I thought you would be the great first to do this with Amy. Especially at our background where I was working with you. I think it was 6 years ago now, actually,
I
that
think
we've
so.
known each
At
other. And
least. Yeah. Yeah.
that's pretty cool that at the time too, with Power Platform only really being out, I think it's now 9 years technically since
Yeah.
2016 when I joined your team. That was really the first place I saw one Power Platform being rolled out at such scale, and
Hmm.
just really all together that. Quite frankly, we kind of took some of the ideas, and I think you served as a great template for a
Oh,
consulting
good.
business around Power Platform.
Happy to help.
So we might have borrowed some ideas, learned a thing or two
Good for
from you,
you.
but
Good for you.
I'd love to maybe just give you a chance to jump in and see where would you say your journey started with maybe not Power Platform specifically, but just your journey into this space with technology, AI, Power Platform, application development, healthcare. How did we get to know the Amy Reimer we know and see today?
Yeah. Uh, most people say there's no coincidences. So I guess, it's up for personal interpretation, but I kind of fell into technology, if I'm honest. I had worked in the care delivery space at Kaiser Permanente with pharmacy, and then I moved to the health plan side of the business. And then I don't know if it was 2010, 2011, I was hired into IT. And at the time, I was kind of like, yeah, sure, why not? And maybe about a year into that role, somebody said the word SharePoint. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And for whatever reason, it just, the tool at that time really clicked with the way that my brain worked. And we're talking like SharePoint 2007. So it was
Yeah.
very old school, antiquated technology from what we know it as today. And so, really from there, my journey with the Microsoft stack evolved over, the past, whatever, 12, 13 years. And yeah, so coincidence, I don't know, but it's worked out.
Oh yeah, yeah. And now your role at Microsoft, you're a industry advisor. You want to share a little bit how that's transitioned into what your current role is? I know we'll
Sure.
jump into the Kaiser stuff a little bit more, but just to share
Yeah.
that kind of where you're at now.
Yeah. My team at Kaiser, especially during COVID, we got a ton of value out of the Power Platform and building and deploying applications extremely rapidly to try and help our clinicians and nurses both stay safe, but then also just expedite care because there was a lot of really sick people in our hospitals. And so coming out of COVID, obviously I'd worked really closely in partnership with Microsoft. And so probably about December, they kind of started recruiting me away from KP and said, hey, how would you feel about coming to Microsoft and doing for healthcare companies around the world what you've been doing at KP? And so I left Kaiser and yeah, I'm at Microsoft and essentially the consulting and subject matter expertise part of my job at KP is really what I'm doing at Microsoft today for really large payer providers that just, a lot of people have the licensing and they're just really unsure of how to get the greatest value proposition out of it. And so that's, one area of focus for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so this first segment is at least how I'm going to refer to it as. I'd love to
Okay.
just a little where we've come from and what I've known, especially from your Kaiser side. There's always one stat that stood out to me that you would always share with me, and that's where Kaiser had over 200,000 users that were using SharePoint, Office 365, Power Platform, and your
Mm-hmm.
team, the team I was working with you on
Mm-hmm.
really seem to be at kind of the front of that
Mm-hmm.
endeavor of rolling out those types of solutions, helping the organization. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe just giving a little context, what was that team? How did it kind of work in that realm of supporting, six figures of individuals all trying to use that same technology?
Yeah. Um, I think the first thing that's really important to say is it really takes a village. And I was fortunate enough to work with really just the best and brightest and people that showed up every day with a heart for what we were doing. I think one of the things that's challenging in technology and healthcare, especially, is oftentimes people feel once removed from care delivery. And so it's easy to forget that what you're doing is actually in healthcare and that there is a patient in a waiting room whose life you're potentially impacting because if we're not arming our clinicians with technology that makes their job easier, that impacts the patient. And so I think that is a huge part of why my team, which relative to the size of our user base, was pretty darn small. Um, but yeah, we were responsible for the end-to-end engineering practice across the stack. So everything from server engineering, services engineering, custom development, full coded applications, et cetera. And like I said, COVID really opened the door for us to move into the care delivery space. We'd had some opportunity with that before COVID, but when you're talking about needing an application in 24 hours and you're going to one of our, sister or brother IT organizations and they're kind of going like, we've got a backlog of 6 months. And my team's like, well, we can hit 85% of those requirements with Power Platform and have it out the door in 24 hours. That's pretty hard to say no to. And, we already had the licensing and we've got the infrastructure and, all the security, et cetera. And so, yeah, I mean, we really had an opportunity to shine there.
Was there a kind of a point in time or like a decision that was made to utilize Power Platform? Was it just kind of an organization-wide, hey, we got it, let's start rolling with it? What did that look
No, it
like?
was more like we're really desperate and we got to fix this. And so if you can do it, do it. And
Uh,
the team that I had, everybody was just mobilized and like, let's do this. Like, we really were connected to the fact that there's really sick people on the other side of this, and so we'll give up a night's sleep. Let's get this out the door and get it done. And it's one of those things, right, where it's like if the business isn't finding value in it, it doesn't really matter what IT thinks of the tool. And
yeah.
there was so much value from our clinicians and providers and nurses that they just were, they just couldn't get enough of it. And so it was like, kind of be careful what you wish for, because before you knew it, my team and I were like, oh my gosh, like the number of things that we're being asked to do, and we're all exhausted, and everybody is tired of being at home and, whatever. But
Uh-huh.
it was a great opportunity to prove out the value of it. And then, coming out of COVID, those opportunities just continued because, the speed to market is extremely fast. There is no cost barrier, really. If you own the licensing, it's a pretty low cost to, the business carries the budget for those things, IT doesn't. And so, there's a little bit of a recharge for the development effort, but by and large, the platform itself is operating usually at 4 nines. And so you're not worrying about, DR and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's especially just some of the apps. I remember some of the solutions we were building. I think there's even one that I remember where we're building out that call center solution and we're putting it all on Azure. I think
Yeah.
when we chatted not too long ago, you were saying that that finally also got moved to Power Platform as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So awesome to
Yep.
see some of those, even the big, expensive, or just complicated things, we're still able to eventually start to make the case over for Power
Yeah.
Platform as well.
Yeah. And actually, the business owner of that application, I was on a meeting with last week on the Microsoft side, and he was
Oh,
like,
that's fun.
"There you are. I miss you."
Just get to
Yeah.
wave just on the other side of the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't go far. I'm here.
That's great. How
Yeah.
with of course another topic around this space is the center of excellence, and so definitely wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that topic because one for there's a center of excellence in everything, and so Power
Hmm.
Platform of course has its own version, and
Hmm.
there's 20 other versions. But how would you say your team at KP really either organized as the COE, kind of complemented it, maybe, was a
Hmm.
hybrid version? How would you kind of qualify those lines? And if your team really served in the COE role, or if there's a difference
Hmm.
there?
Yeah. So I had an engineering lead on my team that was really responsible for the purview of the Power Platform, Power Apps in particular. And I mean, in full transparency, so there's Power Apps out of the box, and then there's Power Apps with premium connectors. And
Mhm.
especially coming out of COVID, um, healthcare is really taxed for dollars, and that was extremely impactful on healthcare companies. And so having access to premium connectors which really elevates what the Power Platform can do in terms of applications wasn't something that we had dollars for, and most of the business didn't have dollars for. And so part of what we had decided early on was that we really needed a center of excellence because the number of objects that were in our environment in our tenant was kind of growing exponentially. And if you don't have governance around those things, there's security risks, there's PHI, PII risks, all of that kind of thing. And so when we looked at the full depth and breadth of the center of excellence around Power Platform that Microsoft had, we felt like there were things that just weren't necessarily applicable to our user base. And so the primary component of what we brought in was the nurture component. And
Mhm.
we had a number of power users in our environment, people that were really well mobilized to use the technology effectively, streamline and optimize their workflows, and share that around departments or business units. And so, the other thing that is really important and makes Power Platform cost effective is to try and capture that so that you've got reusable assets. And so that was another driver for, the COE. And so I'm not actually sure the status of it today, because when I left, it was, I think around April, it was in full swing. And I know there was a lot of engagement. But one of the great things about having a COE is that you can detail up front sort of your guardrails and parameters for your
Mhm.
citizen developers. And yes, you can do this, but no, you can't do that. And we want anything that we can repurpose to be kept in Jira or GitHub or Bitbucket, or whatever the technology is that you're using, so that it's extensible. Because if you've got citizen developers that are just rebuilding the same application that somebody else has already done, it kind of reduces your ROI on that. So
Yeah, and the right answer was Azure DevOps, of course. No, no
yeah.
non-Microsoft, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Well, pick your flavor, no vendor
yeah.
left behind. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting that especially you call out like the nurture piece of that because of course you had the PHI a lot of on the security factor, but sounds like you guys and I even remember the community there, like the
Hmm.
team community that was growing and the amount of engagement I thought was always just awesome to see because it
Hmm.
felt like, okay, this is almost an internal forum. Everyone's asking questions, other people are answering it. The team didn't even have to answer half the
Yeah.
questions that were even coming in. And so
Yeah. Well,
how would you
on that,
say you kind of rank those individuals? Oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, on that note, one of the things that we did as a curriculum for
That's
people that wanted to become citizen developers, because I think from the business side of things, that's always kind of a barrier to this platform is how do you teach somebody to develop an application? And so, we developed a curriculum that was 3 different, kind of courses, if you will, that users were able to graduate through. And
Hmm.
to the point that you're making, Storm, like having a community, and people that are answering questions, and because the other thing is like, who's going to be the moderator? That's a heavy lift, and especially in an
Yeah.
organization the size of Kaiser, if you've got an active community of power users and a single moderator, that's a bottleneck, and in a lot of
Yeah.
ways dissuades people from using the platform. And so having people in the community be able to answer and help each other, and then build those relationships to hear different use cases, and like, oh, well, what are you doing? Well, oh, we have that problem too. I mean, it sounds silly, but like one of the most common use cases is an approval workflow, right? People are like, we don't
Yeah.
have any way to get our PTO approved, or we don't have any way to get, like for our providers, they had this when so Kaiser was initially a Lotus Note shop, and then we migrated to Office 365, now M365. And at that time in our Domino environment, we had a couple thousand physician schedule change applications where, physicians would need a change to their schedule. Well, that sounds pretty simple, except for now you're talking about who's going to cover OR if this person is gone, and
Yeah.
is there going to be a provider in clinic? So there's a lot of downstream impact to that. And so just wanting to make sure that people are understanding the tool they're working with, that you're building something that's sustainable, and then wanting to make sure it scales so that you're getting really the most bang for your buck.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've set up a perfect way that I wanted to ask this next question because you've talked a lot about a COE, their general purpose is to drive value, make sure that the business isn't getting encumbered by IT. And really to the use case you just brought up, right? You have a large community, everyone's trying to build the same app, or not everyone, right? But a lot of
Hmm.
times they are ending up, well, I need this, I'm going to just build it. What would be your sense of how a COE organizes to kind of support those types of grassroots initiatives, right? Someone empowering themselves to build something for themselves without putting it on IT. But how do you think a COE should organize or strategize on that? Because, like you said, you want to empower them to do that, but also you want to
Hmm.
catch them to recognize that, oh, 40 of you are doing the same thing. What are the tactics there, do you think, or suggestions for how to kind of catch it while also enable, right? It almost seems like a paradox in
Yeah.
that way, but
Yeah, it is. Because you want to give people enough leeway that they use the tools and they utilize them, but you also want to have enough governance that you don't end up with an ecosystem that's just a graveyard where,
yeah,
15 different things have been built, and maybe somebody is sort of testing their knowledge and skill set, and then they realize that they can't actually get it over the threshold where it would be used. And so, the governance part of it is extremely important from that perspective, because you can set up your power platform in a way that users literally can't do certain things. So I would say, the governance on the front end of that from IT is extremely important. I think on the business side, the community aspect is really important. And I think for people to keep sharing, almost having like, I can't remember what the feature's called, but where your public there's a publication of assets, right? Of things that
mm,
people are
yep,
building, and then people are voting on those things and going, yeah, we need that too. And so it's ranking itself. And then when users are coming into your COE and they're like, this is the business problem that I'm trying to solve, there's somebody else in the community that says, oh, go look in that library because somebody might have already built that. And so then that's where those relationships really become important, because then you've got a new user that's reaching out to somebody that is a power user already, that's built a solution for that same business problem. And, between the curriculum, the community, and then these personal relationships that end up developing from those things, people are really, their paradigm of learning is pretty quick. And, they end up being able to utilize it in a way that's really meaningful.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think I continue to cherish and appreciate that community focused aspect of what you're sharing there because it seems like when you can get a bottom up approach to something, it's
Hmm.
going to bring a lot more momentum. It's going to be more aligned to the actual value that's being kind of mined out of the situation, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's a great call where make it available what there is that has already been developed, what's been brought out from prior people in the organization, and give people a chance to either look for that. And if they can't find
Hmm.
it there, then okay, here's a chance to start working on it yourself.
Well, yeah, and I mean, um, oh, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something in response to that. Maybe it'll come back.
I know you're talking a lot about that share or that library.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was maybe something to that, but how would you guys organize then getting people to attribute to that library? Was there any sort of mechanism for that, or were you using some of the like governance tools to create that
Yeah. Governance
asset
tools, and
management?
then yeah, and then an agreement when they come into the citizen developer program that these are the things that you're agreeing to. um, because again, it's like if you just end up with an ecosystem with a thousand assets that aren't being used, that's so much tech debt for IT to go back later and clean up. And so I know what I was going to say. The other thing about the community and having a formalized citizen developer program is it breaks that dependency for the business on IT. And
Mm,
PowerPlat especially is one of those places that if you go through the curriculum and you've got an active community and you've got resources for people to engage, you can break that dependency on IT. And that's just one of those age old, kind of friction points that the business is like, I don't want to have to engage IT for this. We
mhm.
should be able to solve this for ourselves. And so I think, that's another really attractive aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, does that COE then, do you see that being a dedicated team? Do you see that kind of being a hybrid of business and IT? What do you think the format that works would kind of be aligned to?
Yeah. I mean, I think, IT has to kind of own the guardrails around it because ultimately it's tech debt for IT, right? That's
Mhm.
where the resources are going to come from that have to manage that, clean up those environments, et cetera. But I think that partnership with the business is so important. And so to identify, kind of some sponsors in the business or people that are already citizen developers that are, at a pretty elevated level that they've we're in the environment, we can see what they're building and whether or not it's being used and how effective it is, et cetera. And so I think that partnership's really important too because the business is what drives adoption. IT doesn't drive adoption.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, because the value's on the business side. IT's
That's right.
just hoping that it's not too
Right.
complex and scary to roll it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference between an IT push and a business pull. And so when you can build those relationships and really, you know, maximize the synergy between what the business sees as valuable and what IT sees as valuable, that's where adoption soars.
Yeah. And speaking of adoption, maybe this is a great segue into the funner part. I'll use the funner word, but
Okay,
where
use the
Copilot and
funner word.
AI are starting to come into play. And
Yeah.
so I'd love to hear a little bit of maybe, I know your current role is looking a lot more at the AI side of things and Copilot and what have you. But
Yep.
how do you see, the transition from where you're working in Power Platform? What's kind of your take on AI? How Copilot's kind of coming into the future, and what
Hmm.
kind of gets you excited about that, and the use cases that are really driving adoption, I suppose. What are the ones you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I feel like all the conversation that we've had around citizen developer programs and power platform communities, et cetera, um, I don't think they're going to be around for very long. And I think even citizen developers are going to quickly become something of the past because the technology is advancing so quickly that
Mhm.
it's at the point where users can just tell the machine what they need it to build.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, let's be clear, it's called a co-pilot for a reason. You're still the pilot. The user is still the pilot. They need to be the pilot. And that should be something that always remains true. There needs to be a human in the center of that. but I think, the barrier that many organizations feel to being able to launch a citizen developer program or a center of excellence or a power platform community, we're going to see that come down because they're not going to need so many resources to staff that, if you will. And so that gets me excited because I work with a lot of clients that have all of the licensing and they're really not maximizing it. And so, in
Mhm.
healthcare, especially, that always makes me kind of go, because that's a pass through to the patient. Healthcare in
Yeah.
America is already extremely expensive. And so I hate to see when organizations are paying for something that they're not really utilizing. But having said that, totally understand the resource ask on the side of my customer to say, let's build a COE, let's launch a community, let's do a citizen developer program, let's develop your curriculum. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And so that part of AI gets me very excited. I think the other thing is that we're really starting to see so many use cases with AI where the patient's population health, people's longevity, proactiveness in healthcare is really going to change. And my personal passion, that just makes me so happy.
Yeah, that's even my next question that I was going to bring up. I know you've always been a champion of care quality, and that
Yes.
being something I've known since the first day I've met you, is that
Yes.
you care significantly from, okay, you can build cool stuff, but if that's not making the patient's life easier, why did
Yes.
we do it?
Yes.
And so, what do you think are some of maybe the metrics or KPIs that kind of correlate from what AI is providing to actually really hitting that real term, real life quality, if you will. Are there
Mhm.
any things you're kind of tracking or looking for that are showing that AI is really hitting the value there?
Yeah, I was working with a customer this week on a pharmacy benefit management system. And so I'll just give a little backstory. This particular customer has a whole department of pharmacists that their entire job is just checking drug interactions. That's all they do all day long is they just check drug interactions. And there's, some national databases that, that where that information is housed. But so they came to me and said, well, how do we automate this? And my question to them was, well, what happens before this? And what happens after this? Because I can automate this piece, but that doesn't necessarily bring the greatest value. And in healthcare, there's kind of a saying that everybody should be mobilized to operate at the top of their license. Well, if you're a pharmacist, I'm going to guess that sitting and checking drug interactions all day is not at the top of your license. And so
Uh,
as we had this conversation, where it ended up was not only, is the drug interaction a challenge for them, but it's really delaying the time that it takes a member or their patient to get their prescription. And then there's another team of people that are checking their benefits and policy information. And and then we're kind of relying on their doctor to be looking at their medical history before this has been prescribed. And so what I said is, what if I brought all of those processes together and I put AI over the top of it that can do all of that. It's going to look at the medical history, it's going to check the drug interactions because it's going to be grounded on these databases, and then it's also going to go pull their benefits and policy information so they know, the patient knows up front if this is being paid for or is there a real financial burden that's coming from this. And so
mm,
in terms of like KPIs at this point, obviously we can measure how much faster a patient is getting that prescription versus before. We can from kind of the soft ROI, if you will, or KPI side of things, we can figure out whether or not these pharmacists are happier in their job than sitting in front of a computer and checking drug interactions all day. But in terms of like what does that do for long-term health of a patient, I think we're it's too soon to be able to say that. For the patient knowing up front, like you've been prescribed this and your policy doesn't cover it. And so this is what you're going to be looking at, or here's the alternatives. There's, some generic medications that we can supplement, this, this drug with or whatever. So I think it's really specific to every use case, to be honest. I mean, it's really hard to just take a broad stroke and go, these are the KPIs that you should be looking for with AI, especially in healthcare. But I feel really confident that there are specific KPIs with every use case that can definitely be, set and achieved.
Do you think, because I remember another one you were bringing up was about the transcript mechanism, or there's a use case you're talking about where the doctors were having like a transcription process. I don't know if that was necessarily so AI or not when you were talking about it, but do you see, especially in terms of patient care, do you see that AI Copilot is being used more for the operational efficiencies, it sounds like, or are there use cases where you're seeing the patient themselves actually engaging with, a chatbot, if you will?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of use cases off the top of my head where a patient is interacting with a chatbot, if you will, but to the point of, so I think the tool you're talking about is DAX Copilot, which is a Nuance product. And so that's a tool that, and like you said, care quality has always been a focus of mine. So I'm really invested in this tool because it liberates a provider's fingers from the keyboard. And to me, that's the first sign of really high quality care. If I've got the full attention of my provider or my clinician, instead of them having to chart at the same time that they're, trying to have a primary care appointment or a, whatever, dermatology appointment, et cetera, there's something in that translation that really connects for people, for patients. It's kind of like, if you go to the dinner table and this little device is with you and you set it down on the table while you're having dinner, it sort of sends a cue to everybody you're having dinner with that you're not actually the most important thing going on for them right now. And it translates the same way for a patient, right? The doctor walks into the room and eye contact in the first couple of minutes, introduce yourself, what are you here for? And then they sit down at their computer, and the rest of the time you really don't get their eye contact because they're having to chart what's going on. So the Nuance DAX Copilot is a tool that they open up in their EMR, they start it, and they never touch the keyboard again. So it transcribes everything that is involved in the conversation between the clinician and the patient. If the patient starts talking about a fishing trip, it's smart enough that it scrubs that out. That does not make it into the chart note. And then, it runs macros. So for the provider, if they have orders that they want to make for this patient, they just tell it to open their order screen and they can, again, just vocally make the order for the patient. And so we are seeing a lot of response from patients in terms of what they feel like is care quality. On the clinician side, we're also seeing far greater detail in the chart note because it is taking a lot of lift off of the provider and things that they would not normally chart because they're already typing too much and then spending pajama time in the evening, opening and answering email. It's, the technology is picking up on all of that. And so, again, what that looks like in terms of long-term care quality, we're still really early in all of this to know. But, kind of the ancillary reporting, people are very, very happy with that.
Yeah, as soon as you brought that up, I just thought that was fascinating. I've even started to use the Chat GPT on my phone, and
Yeah,
I got it to
yeah,
quiz me on. I've been listening to like the History of Rome podcast, so I'm like, all right,
yeah,
pretend like you're a game show host and ask
that's
me
great.
questions. And so I was like, this is kind
Yeah,
of fun. Like, I actually found it cool to be able to talk to it and it respond and just kind of have
yeah,
that dialogue. And so I
yeah,
could see where the recording and that kind of use case right there in the operating room,
yeah.
or just in the patient room with them.
Patient room. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Um,
next time you do that, tell it to do that for you in a Dr. Seuss theme.
okay. Yeah, that
You'll get
sounds
a kick
fun.
out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've asked it to do a few poems and
Yeah,
about Power Platform, and it did a fantastic job. So
that's great. Are you going to share one with us today?
I did put one on LinkedIn. I'll ask
There
it
you
to
go.
generate another one with I think what was the new I threw bring in like the word elephant or something, and it did a
Yeah,
fantastic job. So
that's
it's
great.
I do love it for what it can generate, but some of that
Yeah,
seems a little more fun than
yeah, yeah,
actual science, if you will.
for sure. That's great.
But yeah, and so I guess on, with the AI side of things, and I certainly always have my head in thinking about governance and COE and that.
Mhm.
How do you see the role of the COE then, and really just leadership in general kind of changing to adapt to support AI, to enable AI, co-pilot,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
How do you think the role of that kind of structure changes for a COE?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to change it a lot. I think, the purpose of a center of excellence doesn't change, but I think the way that it's structured changes because the tools are going to do so many things that right now humans are having to do. So I think in that term, in those terms, it changes. I think the thing that never changes is you can't have a community of bots, right? If you're a human, you don't go to a community of bots for interaction. And so relationships are just not going to be replaced with AI. And that's where the community is always going to be really important. Having somebody that's done what you're trying to do, that understands your business problem, that can talk it through with you. The technology doesn't have empathy. Like
Yeah.
ChatGPT might say something nice to you, but it doesn't have empathetic feelings.
Uh-huh.
And so, having that personal interaction in a place that all of your users can come together and have dialogue and bounce ideas off of each other, et cetera, I don't see that being replaced.
Yeah.
And I think if you do try to replace that you're going to see your adoption wane because the one thing that all the data shows coming out of COVID is people are really hungry for other people, for real life talking people and seeing people. And so I feel like let the technology do what it does best, which is perfunctory stuff. I mean, obviously it does way more than that, but in a COE, set up your governance, let it monitor all that, let it spew out the reporting, anything that is an outlier, there's a risk, et cetera. But let the people do what they do best too, which is building community.
Yeah, that very well said. And yeah, you're totally right where the human aspect of that seems to always be where it can give you some ideas and it can hallucinate things of all sorts
Yeah.
of varieties, like an excellent
Yeah.
Power Platform poem. But
Yeah. With an
what's
elephant.
yeah, exactly. I could never rhyme elephant with Power Platform, but it
Yeah.
figured it out. So
Yeah.
but I think that rings so well where it's like the human piece of all of this and technology in
Mhm.
general seems to always have to be remembered because as soon as we forget that, that's where it always does seem to skew and start going off, and then the quality side starts to falter.
Mhm. Yeah, for
And,
sure. And, people, everybody, I kind of just assume in every situation, like everybody's really smart. They know when they're interacting with authenticity. And,
Mhm.
so I don't know how you create that in a chat bot. I don't know how ChatGPT or, Microsoft Copilot makes somebody feel like I'm being really authentic when I say, I'm so sorry that happened. Like,
Are there, I know we've been talking about AI broadly, with the co-pilot side of things, especially within Office 365, how it can go through and kind of contextualize itself based on, your
mhm,
documents and all of that.
mhm.
Have you seen any use cases, maybe not so care specific, but have you seen any use cases at health organizations, where they're starting to adopt kind of co-pilot in terms of that focus?
Yeah, there's a lot, actually, there's a lot of adoption with that. And like, I'll just reference one. So, call centers and contact centers, which you touched on that application we built years ago. Those folks, I have so much respect for the job that they do because to sit and take problem calls all day long and remain sympathetic and empathetic and a good resource for your members, et cetera, that's a tough job. And they get asked a variety of things, right? Everything from I got a bill and I can't pay it, and I got a bill and I don't know why I got a bill, to I need a vascular surgeon in this zip code, to, I mean, it's really a varied kind of role. And for the patient, the person that they're talking to in that call center or contact center, that might be the only person with your payer healthcare company that you ever talk to. And so that person is also a brand ambassador. And so that exchange is really important. It's really important that the person taking that call is representing your company in a way that the member feels good about the fact that this is my health insurance company, even though I got this bill that I can't pay or I don't know why I got this bill. And so we've been using AI a lot in those situations in Copilot where it's synthesizing all of the information on the patient as they're
Mm-hmm.
being verified and calling in so that they can be serviced much more quickly. The call time is shorter. If the agent's being asked for a vascular surgeon in Minneapolis, it's returning results that fast instead of them
That's
going to
great.
Google and like reading names off. Well, what about this doctor? You know, because
Uh-huh.
that's really
Yeah.
what they had to do. And so, and the benefit to that is twofold, right? Because the business is getting value out of that because the call time is shorter and you know, they're able to service more patients. But the agent is getting benefit out of that as well because they've got tools that are helping them do their job faster and easier, and then you've got the member that is having an increased experience because of those tools. And so it's, I am really happy to see that it's a technology that's being applied broadly. It's not, it doesn't have a narrow use case. And so, you know, you talk about supply chain or the use case you and I were joking about before we started the call, which is, you know, if you're an HR manager and you're tasked with piles and piles of resumes against a specific requisition and you're trying to find the most qualified candidate, turn Copilot loose on that. You know, open
Yeah.
those resumes and have it compare and tell you which of these candidates is most qualified for this requisition, and then take it a step further and ask it to build your interview questions, you know. And so
Yeah.
those kind, you know, again, it's got so many use cases and is being applied so broadly that it's fun for me to be on this side of the fence, if you will, and get to see that.
Yeah, I swear we're gonna take the interview process. So every this is fact that every net new interviewee we get, you're going through ChatGPT now.
Yeah.
You're getting asked questions at least, but
Yeah.
all jokes aside, it actually, like you said, it's for generating the questions, you letting us decide, and then okay, how do we frame those then? I think that's just where I continue to see such value in that. Hey, give us a foundation to work off of, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
It's definitely been cutting minutes, hours out of my time on a lot of these types of activities. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely love that interviewee use
Yeah.
case and resume kind of synthesizing.
Yeah. Me too, as long as I'm not on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I don't want to be used that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think I had one more question, and we'll see if any questions from the audience. But just, with the community piece that you were talking about in the beginning, I think you shared a little bit on it already in this segment, where just the human piece is so valuable to not forget and to realize that it has to be there at the end of the
Yeah.
day. But how do you see communities of engaging and kind of changing, just like the COE, if you will? But how do you see them changing all in all to support AI? And how do you think, how do you see the future of that kind of evolving?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Especially the Copilot tools. I feel like there's a lot of places that can be leveraged, and yet there needs to be, um, you know, people that recognize where the highest value for that is. So if you're in an organization, we'll just take healthcare, and you're buying Copilot licenses for your frontline nursing staff, that's not a great use of that tool. They're in Outlook maybe once or twice a week because they live in the EMR. And so it makes no sense to pay for them to have Copilot that's going to summarize their email for them because most of their email is in the EMR. Now, there's
Mm,
a lot of EMRs that are coming out with Copilot that are Copilot type tools that are going to do that for nurses, but specifically Microsoft 365 Copilot, that's just not a great use of that. I would even argue that executives aren't necessarily there. There are things that M365 Copilot can do that makes their job easier. Specifically, recapping meetings, the transcription in meetings, maybe recapping their email to surface the most important things or action items for them. But by and large, executives don't build their own PowerPoints. They don't answer their own email. They don't manage their own calendar. And so what I say, to my customers is instead of giving it to your executive when you're, running your pilot or you're in your initial rollout, give it to the executive assistant, because that's really where the value is going to come from. If you're not using Microsoft 365 tools, you're not going to get a huge benefit out of it, because that's really what it's grounded in. And so, for me, I have a specific prompt that I run in Copilot every single day when I come into the office. And it literally just, it's a little like, dear Copilot, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to summarize all of my emails, my Teams messages, my channel messages from yesterday, list any items that are action items in a dedicated column, suggest follow-ups, et cetera, and put this in bold if it's from my manager. And I mean, it does it that fast. Well,
Wow.
I don't know if you've ever been on an email thread where it's like, especially if you're out of the office, right? You're on vacation, you come in and it's like, oh my gosh, I have so many emails. Copilot will summarize all of that for me, and I don't have to worry about what I missed. I don't have to spend the time to sit and read through everything, or, the
Yeah.
infamous, you're on a thread and it's like there's 32 emails and then somebody sends it to you and it says FYI. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm going to have to scroll through all of this so that I'm FYI'd. And so Copilot will do that for me. So I mean, those use cases, I think there is enormous value in the tool. But again, it's, fit for use, fit for purpose. Just go back to the basics of IT and really look at your personas and populations and figure out, is this somebody that's actually using the M365 tools regularly enough to get the value out of a Copilot for those tools?
That's great. Yeah, and I saw one of the questions that just got posted, and I think you started to hit on it there. Where what would be some of the advice you'd give to an organization just starting their journey on AI and automation like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is, find your champions, right? Everybody has change champions, people that are so eager to try new technology. So find your change champions, and then, I really feel like in everything that I've seen, including the deployment at KP, having, a team that's responsible for the engagement of the users that got the tool on a weekly basis has been a huge success. I think the other thing that we see that is really successful, and we do this here at Microsoft, is we have a prompt library, and then we hold things called a prompt-a-thon. And so we have a place that if you come up with a prompt that is like, oh my gosh, look at everything that this gave me, you can go share it. So we have a community where you can share those
Oh,
prompts.
that's
And then we
awesome.
also have a prompt-a-thon a couple times a year where it's like, okay, let's see who can come up with the best prompt. Here's what we're looking at, and here's what we're trying to get to. And so,
Mhm.
that kind of engagement, making it fun, gamifying it and stuff, that's always a huge hit with users. Badging for users that are your ambassadors, your change champions. That's been wildly successful. And then I would say, really manage the timeline of your pilot or deployment. What we find is that companies that are like, we're going to pilot this for 6 months, you just, it goes like this with the user curve. They just
Mm-hmm.
lose interest. And so, if you can condense that and go for 4 weeks, there's going to be high and heavy engagement with this pilot group. We find that adoption is much better.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And yeah, I love the identifying the change champion, because you
Yeah.
need someone who's willing to kind of just break a few things, figure it out,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
find the right fit. So I think that's a great call out.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions I had and little topics I wanted to bring up. Is there any last thoughts or guidance you'd want to share with anyone interested in Power Platform AI?
No, I think the thing that's just probably my parting thought is I work with a lot of people that are really afraid of the technology. Everybody's like AI, it's going to replace jobs, it's going to take over, it's going to this, it's going to that. And I think I shared this with you. I am certain that for people that were living when Thomas Edison was alive, they felt the same thing. It was
Hmm.
terrifying. And it's not very often that we have technology that changes the economy, that creates new places in the economy for people to make money, things like that. And so, I tell people, like, think of it like electricity. I'm sure everyone was terrified of electricity and what that was going to mean for the way that they lived. And I think we would all agree we live so much better with electricity than we lived without.
Yeah,
And so I really think of all of the AI tools the same. I think, there is appropriate places for it and inappropriate places for it. And as long as people are, exercising that kind of judgment, I think it has enormous potential to really enrich people's lives, especially at work.
that's great. And perfect words to end on is don't be afraid of
Don't be
what the future
afraid.
holds for us.
Yeah, yeah, very true.
Awesome. Well, Amy, thank you so much. This was a great first chat, and
Thank
we'll
you,
definitely be
Storm.
having more. Maybe it'll be episode 40 if we get there, but we'll
I
work
love
through
it.
that. So
All
awesome. Well,
right.
thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks,
Thanks for everyone
everybody.
attending. Have a great
You
day.
bet. You too.